This episode of the RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. AIM EC Herbicide powers up your spring burn-off with control of the tough weeds like kochia and cleavers. And because it's a Group 14 product, AIM EC Herbicide is the cornerstone of a solid resistance management program.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 and Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday as well. Big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We got a RealAg Issues panel today from front to back. Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture will also be joined by Tyler McCann. He is managing director at CAPI, based out of Quebec. We got a great list of topics here. Talk about plant breeding. We're going to talk about the geopolitical situation. We're also going to talk about farm group amalgamation. We are going to hit on, and also the sustainable ag strategy as well. If you have any feedback on today's show, we're going to talk about some contentious issues. We want to hear from you. shaney@realagriculture.com is my email. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and we'll get to the RealAg Issues panel right after this quick break.
It's time for today's product spotlight. Joining me now on the line is Barry Mann. He's with Genesis Fertilizers. So tell me, Barry, what is the Genesis Fertilizer project?
It's a limited partnership with primarily farmer involvement, farmer ownership. And the project was formed to build out a Western Canadian fertilizer manufacturing and distribution system. So we're moving directly into the production of primarily urea, and then building out a system of distribution centers across Western Canada for the storage and blending. So farmers are taking a stake directly in the plant based on the amount of fertilizer they use on their farm. They're going to own the equity in the company that represents those tons that they're using. The ownership is going to be the farmers. Those profits, those margins, which are, like I said, are some of the greatest in the industry, they're going to stay on the farm.
For farmers who are interested, where could they go for more information? GenesisFertilizers.com.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday edition of the show. It's RealAg Issues Panel. And before we get started with the panel, I want to tell you about how every seed really starts a story. It's about planning, hard work, problem solving. It ends with, well, a lot of bushels, pride, and lasting memories. Make Alliance Seed part of your story. Learn more at allianceseed.com. And I know Alliance Seed was at the crop production show where it was cold. Very, very cold. Old man winter. He is ugly this week in a good part of Canada and throughout the Midwest as well in the United States. Okay, in first, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you?
I'm doing so well, Shaun. How are you?
Good. Hey, you spoke at a GFO regional meeting yesterday, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. I was in the lovely Cobourg, Ontario, for the District 12 meeting. Fantastic turnout. Lovely to see so many people. I got to actually meet quite a few people who are, of course, listeners of the show and watch the agronomist or whatever, but never actually met them in person. So that was kind of cool. And even a few of the farmers that we talked to on the Farmer Rapid Fire that I got to meet in person. So that was really cool. There was very little heckling, which I am appreciative of.
That's I was giving Ken Schaus a little hard time about yesterday. He, when I spoke at SWAC, I'm sure he was heckling. He's like, no, I was too far back. You didn't hear my heckles. Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner, coming out of a very, very cold, snowy, very typical winter in Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well. Yes, winter arrived this week, or real winter arrived this week. Until now, we've had a pretty above normal winter, and the snow, we had a snow day. Kids were at home yesterday due to a whiteout, and temperatures now we're down where the rest of Western Canada has been the last couple of days.
Yep.
Minus 37 wind chill this morning, I think, is what I saw on the weather app.
I think Alberta's got you beat. I think we're like minus 47 with the wind chill.
Yeah, I think it is colder further west. There's a front somewhere, but it's, yeah. We're down to real winter now.
When Celsius and Fahrenheit connect, we have a problem. And
you just
what were they doing in Alberta? Somebody was hammering nails with a banana or something. I saw it was a viral video yesterday.
You're watching different TikToks than I am.
Some carpenter with a banana. I don't know what it was.
As one does.
Yeah, exactly. Also joining us is Tyler McCann. He's the managing director at CAPI, based out of Quebec.
And guess what, Shaun? Things are better in Quebec, like they usually are. We've got nice 7 degrees, -7, sunny weather, sun shining. Again, winters finally came. We were a little bit too warm, but hard to beat Western Quebec today.
Well, if you're watching this on YouTube, you see what I'm going to say here. And if you're listening on RealAg Radio 147 of the podcast, I'll just describe it for you. Kelvin's winter beard is going a lot better than Tyler's.
Yes, if I could pull off the winter beard like Kelvin does, I definitely would. But that's a skill I don't have.
Me neither. I can't do it either.
We don't need it though, Tyler. It's lovely.
That's
and now
right.
that I've said that, I have cursed us. But yes, we don't need it.
I wish I could grow a beard. I wish I could.
It's part laziness, but
Full disclosure.
Yeah, full disclosure. I also spilled coffee on the laptop this week, so trying this by phone today. So it sounds the sound might not be up to normal radio standards here.
Oh, you're okay. We'll let you be.
Sounds fine.
Okay. Kelvin, this week, we've been talking a lot about the opportunity in 2024 for there to be some rate cuts in the U.S. and in Canada. And we had some inflation numbers in the U.S. come out, I believe it was on Wednesday, and they kind of surprised to the upside based on what people were expecting. And it kind of looks like we may have to sort of pause. And if you took the over on when the first rate cut was coming, you maybe are the winner, because it's not looking like we're going to get a rate cut in the real short term anyway.
Yeah, a little bit higher than what the market was expecting. 3.4% was the headline inflation rate this week from the U.S. government, and the expectations were 3.2%. That's up from 3.1 the previous month. So I think in the big picture, this might kick back that first rate cut by a month or two, but not a major impact. Now we're talking second, third quarter of this year is what kind of the consensus seems to be. I've been saying this other times. I think inflation will be slower to come down than what a lot of people, especially consumers, are hoping in terms of borrowing rates. But just because of many of the factors are still in play when it comes to conflicts around the world, where we're logistical and shipping issues continuing, looking at what's happening in the Red Sea region, and also governments pushing green policies. A lot of them are inflationary by nature as well, so that those haven't gone away. And so I do think in general this is again a tick in that side of the ledger as well, that inflation is proving to be maybe tougher to bring down than what people are expecting.
Yeah, speaking of the Red Sea, we've seen the Houthi rebels have been targeting ships going through the Red Sea. And Lindsay, we saw yesterday things escalated where the U.S. and the U.K., supported by Canada, the Netherlands, and a couple others, basically, I would say sort of like a warning, some warning shots, some targeted hits, where, trying to, I guess, bit of a warning shot in terms of, hey, back off, Houthi rebels. This feels kind of unsettling based on the fact that, Iran does support the Houthis. It just, you can kind of like, the snowball's a little bit scary here.
So, and this is very much what people have talked about with, the Gaza-Israel are we calling it a war? I think we have to at this point.
Oh, yeah.
That breaking out in October, the longer that has gone on and the worse that has become, the more likely that other countries and other things in the region start to escalate as well. So the attacks on these drone attacks on shipping, on ships moving through the Suez Canal, I mean, you can't just do nothing, right? I mean, is that acceptable? I don't think so. I don't like. So I'm not surprised to see something happening, but I think for many that are watching this and hoping that things would de-escalate versus escalate, that's not what we got. So this week we definitely did see or are seeing that escalation. Yesterday at the JFO meeting, I talked about, and I put up a slide about container rates and where they're headed. I mean, the line goes straight up right now on the chart, right? So again, and we talked about this, not as bad, not nearly as the pandemic, but the rate at which it's increasing is straight up. So this immediately is impacting consumer goods for sure, but of course the major focus is going to be on oil, and then the longer any of this goes on, the more things it starts to impact, including agriculture, commodity movement as well. But I think that the underlying thing right now is what happens. So then we get this escalation. What happens after this? So does it just keep escalating? Is this enough? It's a mess.
Yeah. Tyler, what's your take on what's happening in that area?
I mean, I think it's fortunate, for better or for worse, that this is happening now, because I'm worried what would happen if this was happening 12 months from now. This is an example where around the world we need leadership, we need statesmanship, we need to kind of be able to strike that right balance between containment and escalation. And the governments in the US and the UK really in the leadership position here, but tried to contain this without escalating it. That wasn't successful. They've escalated it very in a very targeted way, in a way to try and prevent this broader fallout. I think it really is a great demonstration of why we need real U.S. leadership in the world. I mean, this is, as much as we talk about Canada supporting the coalition, I think we've got 3 Navy officers that are sitting on a U.S. naval vessel as kind of our token gesture of support. Really, this is the U.S. and the UK, and we're lucky that those governments have responsible leaders today, because this is a tough situation, not an easy decision to make.
I wish we had more to contribute. I think that's a point that I think should be more of a focus in the next Canadian election in 25. That with the defense cutbacks that we have had in Canada, and with all of this, this kind of stuff happening, the fact that we can't even help out our allies from an equipment standpoint is, I think it's sad.
But Shaun, it's interesting. There's some analysis coming out. I think it's becoming clear in the armed forces as investments have been made. Again, if you go back to the ships are starting to come into service. The government announced that they're acquiring drones recently. Investments in equipment are being made. The holdback now is people. We don't have enough people to run our armed forces, and that you can go to the U.S. and buy an airplane. We can't go to the U.S. and buy 2,000 service personnel to keep the armed forces going.
Well, because we keep on tearing it down. Like that's part of the reason we continue to tear it down and reflect poorly. I think I'm not surprised that we've had issues with recruitment into the Canadian military, because it's had a struggle from a brand perspective, and which is kind of not Canadian. I don't know. That's Kelvin. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
I'm tossing it over to you before I say something I'm going to regret when somebody. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to be careful that I don't say something I shouldn't say either, because there are examples, and other countries are dealing with this too. There's ships coming on board, and I believe it was the UK. They were talking about how they were having to decommission ships just because they didn't have enough officers to actually maintain and properly staff up all these ships as new ones were coming online. And I think Canada's probably in a similar situation here. And so the thing about the Canadian election, though, I don't know, and Tyler can speak to this, but I think it's kind of a rule of thumb in Ottawa is that foreign affairs doesn't really play or influence the outcomes of federal elections in Canada. Our our voting public it's not on the top 3 priorities unless something catastrophic would happen globally. I don't see that really being one of the top things that people vote on.
I think, Kelvin, what's different today is that there is something catastrophic happening in a region of the world that is very important in some targeted ridings. And so I do think we're actually getting to a position where, depending on the state of the Israel-Gaza conflict at the time of the federal election, it may have an impact. And I think we're seeing this a little bit in how the government's struggling to take clear positions around which side of that conflict it is on. I think as we see South Africa take Israel to the International Criminal Court, we've seen kind of different positions in Europe, Germany coming out on the Israeli side, France coming out on the Gazan side, Canada coming out on no side at all, because I think the government is very clearly split. And this is actually an issue where it's not going to make a difference across the country, but at a time when the Liberals are going to be fighting for every seat that they can get, it may actually hold them back and have an impact.
Yeah, and this is a weekend where, to add another topic to the list, we've got the Taiwanese general election happening tomorrow as well. And I was reading a story this morning that the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, is the ruling party, is leading, and that's the party that represents Taiwan's separate identity from China. So that's another issue to throw in the mix too if we're talking about geopolitics. Okay, we're going to bring it back to domestic issues in Canada when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio here in the RealAg Issues Panel. Right back right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's strong portfolio of wheat, durum, barley, oats, peas, and rye, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. We got Tyler McCann from CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, both of RealAgriculture, and myself, Shaun Haney. Kelvin, are you ready to revolutionize your farming practices and stay ahead in the ever-evolving world of agriculture?
That's usually the goal, yes.
Yeah, good answer. Okay, so you need to be joining the Crossroads Crop Conference if you're like Kelvin. It's happening January 29th through the 31st at the Westin Calgary Airport location. Great bar and great breakfast at that hotel. I've stayed there a few times. Register at crossroadscropconference.ca and get ready to examine the big picture innovation in agriculture. Okay, gang. Let's dig in on, let's talk about farm group consolidation. And the reason I bring that up is earlier this week at Crop Production Show, the Saskatchewan Crop Commissions, of course, are holding their AGMs, and they did it off-site of Prairieland Park. And we interviewed two executive directors and one past chair through the organization. So Tracy Broughton from Sask Flax and Sask Canola was a guest when I interviewed her. And if you want to hear that interview, you can find it at realagriculture.com, or it'll also be on RealAg on the weekend as well. And Tracy and I talked about the unanimous amalgamation vote of Sask Canola and Sask Flax to combine. Then I asked her, is this the beginning of a little bit of a snowball? Because we've seen Alberta Grains, which is Alberta Wheat and Barley, come together. Of course, the GFO is over 10 years old. Manitoba Crop Alliance. I think there could be more farm group consolidation in the future. And I asked Tracy about it. Here's what she thought if the snowball was starting.
I think that'll be driven by our growers. We definitely, it's definitely starting some conversations. There are some growers that feel very strongly that we should have, one group representing everyone. I've heard that. I've been in the Saskatchewan ag industry for over a decade now, and I've heard some people say that. I've heard other farmers say that, we need to have lots of farm representation because we want to make sure we have grassroots, lots of farmers being represented. So I think it is a bigger, longer conversation. With flax and canola, that's just one small.
Lindsay, what are your thoughts? Because I see both sides of this argument, and there are maybe not even two sides. Maybe there's multiple sides. But what do you think we're going to see as we look, say 10 years out?
So I definitely think we will see more amalgamation, and frankly, the amalgamation we've seen, I think, really makes sense, and for a couple of reasons, and especially as you mentioned, Grain Farmers of Ontario is a great example of what it looks like when you have several different crop organizations come together. So we have some track record now that we can look back at. But, Tracy's point about it being driven by growers, absolutely. But what do growers want of their producer groups is a good question. And one of the things most of them will say is that they want to make sure their dollars go far. They want to know that checkoff money is well spent. Well, for crops that don't have a lot of checkoff money to deal with, having staff and having people trying to be an effective producer group is really difficult. The flip side is, especially in Western Canada, most grain farmers are growing 4, 5, 6 crops. So they're growing a lot of these crops. It's the same farmer. So it just makes sense in a lot of organizations that really they could stretch those dollars and benefit other crops in the rotation that the same farmers are growing anyway. So is it a slam dunk across the board? Not necessarily. I'm not saying it's easy, especially if you've got, definitely you've got to have the right people in place to show leadership of putting this together. I know, and actually yesterday I got to meet one of the founding chairs for GFO, who was he was the corn chair at the time that brought the GFO together, that, the key was, and Barry Senft would have been part of that conversation, was we're now a group. You're not representing your crop that you're coming from that organization. We're now a group together and we're working across all these commodities. So I think it makes sense. I think it's an efficient use of funds. I think that producer groups can be more effective. I will note Sask Wheat brought in winter cereals over the past year too. So that's another one that came in. So we're seeing a lot of it, and I definitely think we'll see more. And I absolutely think it can be a success. You've just got to have the right people in place to sort of bring that forward. And then, honestly, I think that becomes, even more effective when you can get that critical mass put together.
I do wonder if a downturn in the farm economy, Kelvin, would be a real trigger because of, asks for checkoff refunds, or just, people questioning in general, because consolidation happens, in any industry happens for certain reasons. So I wonder if that would play a factor in that.
I think it would. That makes sense in my mind in terms of, like Lindsay said, farmers are looking for ROI or efficiency when it comes to their levy dollars that they're investing in these organizations. And so if there are ways, especially when times are tight and you're paying attention, scrutinizing every line on the expense side of your financial statements, that levy, that if it's refundable, there's a chance that will climb in terms of the amounts that are being asked back, or there will be more scrutiny, attention paid to that, and that in turn will drive tough decisions at some of these organizations. In general, I agree with you both that there will be more amalgamation and consolidation on the farm group side going forward, but I do think that there is still value for some more specific, diverse points of view, because not all farmers have the same interests. We have the same interests on, let's say, 90% of issues, but say it's promoting biofuels. Well, somebody who grows corn versus feeds cattle, they have differing opinions, and so there needs to be voices for both those points of view. As long as not all farms have 100% the same priorities and interests. So I think in the long run, there will still be a diverse set of opinions. Some of this will be sorted out within organizations underneath the same umbrella. But going forward, I think there is still a place for having some commodity-specific type organizations and things like that. Some of that also depends on the governance and structure and how these types of conversations happen inside an organization.
Well, here's one thing I've thought about is that, we're seeing the consolidation happen within the province, okay? And that the reason that's happening instead of cross crop, say, where there's not like a, this is now the Western Canadian Canola Association as an example. We're seeing the consolidation happen inside each of the provinces and not cross province because of how the legislation and who's in control and from a provincial government standpoint. Tyler, I would argue that maybe it makes more sense for there to be some of this consolidation to happen, because as much as Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba think they are different from each other, in some of these commodities, there's a lot of overlap when we look at all the different provinces.
And again, it's not just in the commodities. There's a lot of overlap on farms today. I mean, Kelvin fell into the same trap that most farmers fall into, where we let that 10% difference drive wedges between us, right? We seem to really not like to talk about the 90% of things that farmers have in common. And we don't like talking about what effective advocacy looks like. We don't like talking about what effective research funding looks like. Instead, we talk about the 10% that keeps us different. And that is unfortunate. I think that there are certainly solutions to get across that check off, that legislative issue, those barriers across regions. But I think that the starting principle, I mean, somebody referred to these as tough decisions. These should not be tough decisions, right? We have fewer farmers today than we've ever had before in this country. We've got more large farmers. We've got more common interests across those farmers. It should be a pretty easy decision, actually, to find ways to work together, because we do have 90% of things in common, and farmers do want to see better, more effective results. And it is time, I think, to think differently about it and think that this isn't about protecting my silo. This isn't about protecting flax research dollars versus canola research dollars. There are really good ways to deal with those differences inside organizations. We have more and more organizations with more track records showing how they can manage it. Again, I do think that snowball is already rolling, and I do think in 10 years we will see much fewer farm organizations than we see today, and I think that that's probably a good thing.
One dynamic here that I think often doesn't get talked about, sorry to jump in, and I give Tracy full credit for her sharing her perspective and the perspective that she had in that clip we just listened to. A lot of farm organizations, the farmers that are on the board, lean on the staff and are heavily influenced by the staff in terms of their information and insight and understanding of how the organization works. And the staff have a self-interest, an obvious self-interest of preserving their job. They don't want an amalgamation potentially means job losses in the office. And so there's a conflict of interest or potential mixed priorities there that I think is often an obstacle in some of these discussions.
Yeah, and that's why I think there's that first intermediate step. What we've seen with Alberta Grains and with this canola flax one in Saskatchewan is that they, because of trying to save costs, they share a staff for a period. So the staff is already one, and so that makes that transition even easier. Sorry, Lindsay, I think you wanted to say something?
Well, I think Tyler does as well, but I wanted to add to that point, Kelvin, that yes, there's the people component to this on both sides. So one, I see it also as a positive in that if you put a few crop types together that have common interests or common goals, you might have a bit more budget to maybe, be able to hire a policy person and a research director, and right. So it maybe opens up the door to be able to bring some people on staff that you can now actually afford because you've got critical mass. The second part to that is also the incredible demand we have on the farmers that serve on boards. You've got to fill those board seats, and we get a lot of people that end up serving on all of them because they're willing to do it, and we get board member fatigue. So realistically, by a lot of the challenges of this can very much be handled through the governance and through the bylaws and how we set up these organizations. And so those, I think, to that point, can be more difficult because you do have to have, some very big discussions on what that looks like. But I think that we can handle a lot of what makes us different in that design for sure. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so someone that's worked for a farm organization in the past, I think there's always this balance. We talk about how important the farm leadership is, but I really do think it's really important to recognize how important the staff leadership is. When you talked about Tracy, I think she's shown some pretty good leadership. I think we're going to talk about Carl Potts later. I mean, these are not the farm leaders, but these really are the individuals that are driving those organizations forward. And I think that we do need to recognize that, there is a pressure. You do get to kind of this level where there are only a small number of staff leaders that can show leadership and can make a change and have an impact. And I know it's often a tension, right? Farm groups are there to represent farmers. Their leadership comes from their farmer board of directors, but the staff leadership that exists is just incredibly important. And I think, as again, someone that's spent some time in a farm organization, larger organizations with more resources that are able to really kind of build and grow a team have a huge amount of benefit, and is just one more reason why I think amalgamations are inevitable, but they're a good thing too.
I can remember in Alberta, prior to Alberta wheat, we had all of the different classes of wheat had their own organizations. I can remember as a kid, a young buck interested in agriculture, going to the Soft Wheat Development Commission meeting. And I remember when this whole discussion, yeah, exactly. And people talking about how this would be, if we put all of these organizations together, that will be the death of soft wheat. Soft wheat, we won't even grow an acre anymore. Well, that has not been the case at all. I think a part here is you can do this and have multiple commodities in an organization, provided you focus on a key word, and that is governance. With great governance, you can manage all the diversity of interests. You can manage all the fact that, what gets funded by research, what doesn't. If you don't have the governance, I encourage you not to do the combination and the consolidation. But if we can have good governance, like think about when the GFO got together, right? The fear was corn would rule everything. Wheat would get forgotten. The minor crop said, we don't want to be a participant in this. What happened? They proved it could work. They're not perfect, but they've proved it works. Yep. And all the minor crops are now like, hey, we want to be a part of this larger entity too.
And they've added crops for sure. And, in looking at, what the GFO can do as far as, their Greens in Action program, and their, they can develop a whole bunch of things. They've got some great outreach that they do for students at different, fairs and at the Royal Winter Fair. And they've got, they have all these things that they can actually do because they've got critical mass. They've got some budget, but they've also got the staff to pull this stuff off. So, this is important. But it was very key that when they got together, this is not, corn farmers of Ontario. This is grain farmers, and everybody, all these crops had to be a focus.
And I think farmer opinion on this is there is not like 80% of farmers. I think it's very split for a whole bunch of reasons. And, this is not a quick process. I maybe disagree with Tyler on that, but Tyler, go ahead.
Well, so again, I think it's one of those things where I think if you look at the number of farmers, maybe it's split. I bet if you look at the number of acres, that the split is very, very different. For all of the opposition that happens whenever these amalgamation processes are taking place, we haven't seen a group go back in the other direction, right? I think what we see is once these amalgamations happen, once people realize the benefits that exist, not only does satisfaction increase, but again, we see the snowball pick up speed and get bigger as time goes on. Again, I think that this is a really easy in some of these amalgamations to speak doom and gloom. I think it's really hard to point to anything bad actually happening once the amalgamation takes place.
Well, here, sometimes my timing is good because I think next week we're going to start to have some of the preliminary results of our producer group survey where we actually ask this question, what farmers think. And we're going to be able to dive into what Tyler just alluded to, which was, not just what does the majority think, but how does it split across some of the acres and farm size and age as well? So stay tuned for those results next week. How about that tease? Okay, let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. We got Tyler McCann from CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, as well as myself, Shaun Haney. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense, especially when you're chasing the yields that Kelvin is. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Genesis today, or learn more about Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com. Okay, well, we've covered the farm group consolidation topic. Let's pile on. Let's talk about plant breeding. At the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers meeting this week, which is a meeting that never disappoints. If there's an AGM in Canadian ag politics to go to, I'm telling you, you bring your popcorn and you go to the Sask Pulse Growers meeting, because that is one where people stand up and really fight for what they believe in. And there's a whole bunch of different sides to some of these topics. And this week, it was all about plant breeding. And there was a resolution brought from the floor. We heard Carl Potts talk about this on Wednesday's show. I'm curious, Tyler, you've got a background here in the seed industry prior to your time at CAPI. What is your thoughts on where we go from here? Because it seems at the farm level, there's still a lot of contentious debate on what is the proper way to fund variety development going forward.
Well, I think it's important first to recognize how great it is that farmers are showing up at annual meetings like that and talking about tough issues. These are complex issues. There are multiple opinions, and so good credit to farmers across the country that are showing up at regional, provincial meetings now, having tough issues and respecting ultimately the decisions that get made. But I think when it comes to seed breeding in particular and the future, the more that we see farmers like Kelvin chasing yields, looking for more of that push, looking for varieties that in the Pulse case, again, have more resistance to disease, have that yield boost. And at the same time, the more we see pressure on the old ways of funding plant breeding, the more we're going to need new solutions. And after much debate, the seed industry came together around a royalty mechanism, recognizing that's a mechanism that allows those that are breeding varieties that farmers are using to get rewarded for those varieties, recognizing that those royalties are tied to varieties that produce better benefits, right? So a farmer's going to have to see that yield boost, or is going to have to see that benefit from disease resistance. But if a farmer does see that benefit that they're prepared to pay, that value proposition gets to be really clear, really explicit for farmers. I think that is that future, and I think ultimately it's a good thing. It only works if farmers see benefits. And I think that's the ultimate check and balance for farmers across the country, is that they will be buying varieties and paying a royalty only if they see the benefit, only if they keep that seed, only if and so I think that is a great way to deal with that tension and to ensure that the value proposition is there.
I think what's interesting to me about this example in the pulses is that there was a lot of reference at the meeting about the success of the prior breeding arrangement with CDC. And a big part of that is the fact that it was royalty free. You know, the levy dollars went in and farmers got the varieties royalty free. What's kind of forgotten and didn't come up a lot, which I was curious about, was that the CDC is now working on a new agreement with SPG, and it was made clear at the meeting it's going to involve SVUA. CDC is not willing to move forward with a royalty-free environment because they're also looking for a return. So as successful as anybody thinks that prior arrangement was, even the CDC says they can't go forward under that basis.
Yeah, it's successful if you're a farmer that doesn't want to pay the true cost of the seed. But if you're someone trying to run a breeding program, whether or not you're a private breeder or a public breeder, and again, I think that it's really important to understand that those public breeding programs have been under pressure in the past. They're going to be under even more pressure from a funding perspective in the future. A successful breeding program is ultimately one that's going to be self-sustaining, and a royalty mechanism is one of the best ways to make them self-sustaining.
What I heard loud and clear, Lindsay, is listen, if this is the way it's going to be, I'll tell you what, we better see genetics, because a lot of farmers view this as kind of double dipping. The levy dollars go in, and then they've also got to pay for a royalty, and so there's a feeling of double paying. Okay, so I heard loud and clear, like, if this is the way it's going to be, I'm not happy about it, but I better see genetics that are solving things like Aphanomyces issues, or I better see things that solve, blackleg in canola, what any disease you get, fusarium in wheat or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think I heard that loud and clear.
Right. And I think part of even just thinking about it as double dipping is partially because of the history here that we've talked about, someone, in that, we had a lot of support for public breeding for a long time, and that has been clawed back, cut out, under pressure. So the economic model that a lot of those royalty-free varieties came out of doesn't necessarily exist anymore. And so it's not, I can understand where that perception comes from, but realistically, things have changed. And to Tyler's point, you need to have a self-sustaining model, or you can't continue. And honestly, does anyone really think that there's going to be more public money put into plant breeding? No. So what then are you going to do going forward? I think the key here is there's still choice. So the one other key thing is that the existing royalty-free varieties still exist and will continue to exist. They can be used, and they can be used as they were. And so if you've got a variety or a couple from different crop types of the pulse groups that you like, and you're going to continue using, nothing changes in that instance. So what does that mean? It means that something else is going to have to be better for you to switch. And if it is better, yes, it's going to be a little more expensive, but you're going to be able to pencil out that ROI, or it's going to have to, or you're just going to keep using the older varieties. So it does create more of an actual economic line where you can say, does it or does it not pay for itself? And then you can make that choice.
Got an interesting tweet from Aiden, farmer from Saskatchewan, who heard the interview here on RealAg Radio, and he says I'm not going to read you the whole thread, but he is trying to argue that this is the time for the federal government to step up its public plant breeding because of its sustainability and green agenda. And he says the end result, what about government dollars? With the push to sustainable and green agriculture, make them put their money where their mouth is and invest more dollars in the crops that make the biggest difference. Carbon sequestration, nitrogen fixation, plant-based protein are the pillars of the green agenda. It was an interesting argument for it, Kelvin.
Yeah, and then I think that is something that would be a strong argument with the current federal government in terms of having them commit to public funds here. But I don't know, at the same time, there's constraints on the public purse all over the place right now. And so I think it is fair what Lindsay said to not anticipate increased public support for it. There could be a one-time thing here if the government, if it aligned, but I don't, in the long term, I don't see a trend towards more public funding for plant breeding.
But I think that I think people confuse a couple of different things, right? So government money for R&D is spent in different ways. Part of it is spent developing varieties, but part of it is spent effectively in the breeding space, but developing disease resistance. And I think what that tweet really speaks to is what we need to be doing is investing public dollars more in those more foundational, fundamental research pieces, right? And I think that that's part of what growers miss when they really focus on, we want plant breeders working for the government, finishing varieties and putting varieties into the marketplace. I think what we should be looking for, and especially in an era of constrained government spending, is we want more government scientists doing more of the foundational research that can then be put into multiple different breeding programs. And I think if you go back to Aphanomyces as an example, we don't just want one variety coming to the marketplace with Aphanomyces resistance. What we want is a genetic pool that's more broadly available. And I think getting more government scientists doing more of that foundational work on disease resistance on some of these yield tools, never mind the change that's going to come with gene editing as it becomes more widely available and the impact that that's going to have on the competitiveness of private breeding programs. But to put this all into the same bucket of we want more government plant breeding, I think really misses a really important difference around more government research, which I think is absolutely important and critical. And I think actually the focus on plant breeding inside government actually is pulling money away from that foundational research that should be done, that only government is going to do, but government isn't doing it today because farmers are saying, we want you to finish varieties instead.
We got to take a break, and we're going to wrap up the show. Or Lindsay, final word on this. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, to Tyler's point, it's an excellent one because it's a lot harder to work out an ROI on something like foundational research. That's why we need governments that fund research that may not end up into commercialization, because that's where public dollars then, they do all that hard work that maybe doesn't have an exact ROI on the farm, so that it gets moved into those programs so that there is. So just want to point that out. It's a great point.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Whether you're a rookie soybean grower or a seasoned vet, the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com has exactly what you need to stay in the game. The latest research and the best agronomic advice from industry experts, along with local and global market coverage on demand, anywhere, anytime. Make this growing season your best growing season with the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Are you seeking professional advice? I feel like I need to. No, it's for your farm and your business. MMP's team of agriculture specialists cover it all, from business planning and tax guidance to financial projections, farm succession, and risk management. Visit mmp.ca to connect with the experts today. In between Christmas and New Year's, which is a great time to, if you're going to release something, that's when you should do it. If you want it to be sort of buried in a snowdrift or in between glasses of champagne, Sustainable Ag Strategy. What we heard report came out from the federal government. Tyler, what stuck out to you?
Well, first, what stuck out is that it came out in between Christmas and New Year's, and I think it's a missed opportunity. The Sustainable Ag Strategy should be a real opportunity for Canadian agriculture to improve its competitive advantage, to build a brand, to improve the profitability, prosperity of Canadian farmers. But it says to me that when government's putting it out at that time, government's worried that it's not doing that and it's missing the mark. But I think a couple of really important highlights. They recognize right up front that what they heard is that there's an importance of applying the economic lens, of reflecting regional differences, recognizing those farmers that are early adopters, improving data and measurement. For those of us that have been around this, that's not earth-shattering, but government's recognizing it in what we heard report up front. A lot of other kind of more prescriptive, more precise pieces that are getting reflected. It is a what we heard report. They did hear a lot of very different things, and so those different things are there. This isn't about what the government's position is. Government has a duty to reflect accurately what they heard, and I think that they've done a good job of it. I think that this is just an unfortunate way of doing it, and I think a missed opportunity to draw attention to what should be a good thing for Canadian agriculture.
Lindsay, what we've been hearing a lot of is that, there's a lot of differing opinions here, and this thing seems to be a little bit off the rails.
So I get derailed. How about just put in a box and put in a closet, and we're just gonna forget about it? I feel like we're
like
more
your wedding, you do with your wedding,
or like the Christmas decorations, right? So we're mothballing it. So here's what I'll say: it is an interesting report. There's a lot of good data in there. I'm kind of glad that they did actually publish this, because we can read it over. Guess what? I don't think anything happens with it. Honest to goodness, Lawrence McCauley is not a champion of the strategy like Mary Closey was.
Yep.
Yeah, this was something she was very passionate about. And yes, it was contentious. I think this document captures a lot of that. I think it's great that it seems to capture some of what was said and discussed. I don't think anything happens with it, honestly. I think it gets mothballed.
Hey, Kelvin, what do you think?
I don't know if I disagree with anything that Tyler or Lindsay have said here. A couple things stand out. One, that it was quietly released and, like Tyler said, not talked about. They're often in media. We would be contacted by the Ag Minister's office if it was something like that they were excited about, or that they'd make sure that flag it to make sure that we were covering it and that type of thing. And there's been no word, no statement, no news releases or anything regarding this report. It was just quietly posted on Agriculture Canada's website. Second is one of the controversial items in the Sustainable Ag Strategy was that 30% fertilizer emissions reduction target that got so much attention 2-3 years ago. And the government quietly rolled that target into the Sustainable Ag Strategy. And one of the first things we do whenever we get a new document from the government is hit Control F in your web browser, find the find function, and you search. I type in fertilizer, I type in nitrogen. Neither of those words appear in this Sustainable Ag Strategy What We Heard document. The word nitrous oxide appears once. So to me, there's a signal here, at least to what Tyler said. This is what they heard. This is reflecting what they heard from industry and from stakeholders. They also further to what Lindsay was saying in terms of this being mothballed, they have certainly backed off and have quieted down a lot when it comes to talking about the nitrogen fertilizer emissions reduction target. Where they go with that remains to be seen. Whether what government moves forward with actually matches this What We Heard document, that's something that I think will be determined in the coming months.
I think we're going to live if it goes away. Tyler?
Yeah, but I think it's a missed opportunity. We were talking about public R&D spending, right? The What We Heard report acknowledges that they heard about more investments in R&D. They heard about market-based approaches. They heard about the need for broader and longer term. They heard about the need to connect these pieces along the value chain. They heard about knowledge transfer and extension. I mean, like, these are issues that matter, and this is an opportunity to push those pieces further. I think that this desire to kind of put our head in the sand and say we just want this to go away misses the opportunity to use this and the SAS as a constructive tool to drive a more thoughtful strategic vision for agriculture in the future. That doesn't need to be about 30% fertilizer emission reduction targets. It can be positive, it can be constructive, it can be growth oriented. I'm not saying the SAS is going to be any of those things, but it could be.
Are you calling me an ostrich?
I think
called me an ostrich.
In the spirit of focusing on 10% differences and ignoring a lot of things,
yes,
I think we ignore a lot of the opportunities that are out there too.
So, Shaun, I will just say, I brought this up yesterday that you called it right, that they were looking for an exit ramp. They had come out with this 30% emissions reduction. They were all gung ho. They were met with absolute blowback and hadn't thought it through and didn't have the science and didn't have a strategy, and now they've rolled it into the SAS, and now they're going to put the SAS in the closet.
So, they're still counting on it. They're still banking on it. They're still banking on it to reach Canada's international emissions reduction targets. It's in the accounting for that. So it's still up. It's still up there somewhere.
Okay, we're out of time. We're cut. The commodity wrap's got to come on to Rural Radio here. Hey, Tyler, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you.
Kelvin, you as well.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Lindsay, enjoy the football.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, enjoy the NFL playoffs this weekend, everybody. Hey, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Whether applied with glyphosate or another labeled tank mix partner, fast-acting AIM EC Herbicide is the go-to tank mix product for the hottest burn-off of the toughest weeds. Start out clean this spring with AIM EC Herbicide.